He looked at the witness stand and saw an easy target. Preston Sterling, the city's most expensive defense attorney, adjusted his silk tie and smirked. Sitting in the chair was Ezekiel Carter, a black mechanic with grease under his fingernails and a hoodie that had seen better days. Sterling thought he could tear this man apart, mock his background, and laugh him out of court to protect his billionaire client. But Preston made a fatal calculation. He didn't know who Ezekiel really was, or the secret recording sitting in the mechanic's back pocket. What happened next didn't just win the case, it destroyed a dynasty. You're going to want to hear this. The air in the superior court of Judge Harrison was so stiff it felt like it could snap a neck. That was usually how Preston Sterling liked it. He thrived on the tension, mostly because he knew he controlled it. Preston wasn't just a lawyer, he was a brand. At 45, he had the kind of jawline that graced magazine covers and a win record that made prosecutors sweat through their cheap suits. He represented the unconvictable, the wealthy, the connected, the sons of senators and CEOs who treated the law like a suggestion rather than a rule. Today, his client was Julian Thorne. No, wait, let's use a different name. Julian Montgomery. Julian was 22, heir to the Montgomery real estate empire, and currently on trial for a hit-and-run that had left a young mother in a coma. The defense strategy was simple. Deny everything, blame the victim, and destroy the credibility of the prosecution's only eyewitness. That eyewitness was sitting on the wooden bench outside the courtroom, waiting to be called. His name was Ezekiel Zeke Carter. Inside the courtroom, Preston leaned over to Julian. "Relax, kid," Preston whispered, his voice smooth like aged whiskey. "I saw the witness list. It's a joke. They have a mechanic from the South Side. I'm going to make him look so incompetent the jury will wonder if he even knows what a car looks like." Julian smirked, checking his Rolex. "Just get it over with, Preston. I have a flight to Aspen tonight." "Consider it done." The bailiff's voice boomed. The prosecution calls Ezekiel Carter to the stand. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the murmur in the courtroom shifted. Ezekiel walked in. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, wearing a flannel shirt buttoned to the collar and work boots that clunked heavily against the polished floor. He looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting toward the jury, then to the floor. He didn't look like a star witness, he looked like a man who had been dragged here against his will. Preston watched him like a hawk spotting a field mouse. Perfect, he thought. He's terrified. He's uneducated. He's mine. The prosecutor, a weary woman named Sarah Jenkins, who had lost to Preston 3 times prior, stood up. She guided Ezekiel through the basics. "Mr. Carter, where were you on the night of November 14th? "I was at my shop, Carter's Auto Repair, on 5th and Vine, working late on a transmission," Ezekiel said. His voice was deep, gravelly, and slow. He spoke with a pause between sentences, as if he had to search for the words. "And what did you see at approximately 11:15 p.m.? "I heard a screech," Ezekiel said, his large hands gripping the railing of the witness box. "Loud, like expensive tires fighting the pavement. Then a bang. I ran out. Saw a black SUV speeding off. Broken headlight. Custom rims." "And did you see the driver?" "Yes, ma'am. Streetlight caught him. It was him." Ezekiel pointed a thick finger at Julian Montgomery, the young man in the grey suit. The courtroom buzzed. It was a direct ID. Sarah Jenkins sat down, looking hopeful. "Your witness, Mr. Sterling." Preston stood up slowly. He didn't rush. He buttoned his suit jacket, adjusted his cuffs, and walked toward the witness stand with a predator's grace. He didn't look at Ezekiel. He looked at the jury, smiling a warm, knowing smile that said, "Watch this." "Mr. Carter," Preston began, his tone dripping with faux politeness. "I must say, I admire a man who works with his hands. It's honest work." "Yes, sir," Ezekiel said, looking down. "But let's be honest with the jury, shall we?" Preston walked closer, invading Ezekiel's personal space. It was 11:15 at night. Dark, raining, if I recall the weather report correctly. "It was drizzling, yes," Ezekiel said, "and you claim to have identified my client inside a moving vehicle with tinted windows, speeding away at, what would you guess, 60 miles per hour? "About 50, I'd reckon," Ezekiel corrected softly. Preston laughed, a sharp, barking sound that made the jury chuckle. "You'd reckon. Tell me, Mr. Carter, do you have any formal training in forensic speed analysis? Are you a physicist?" "No, sir. I'm a mechanic." "A mechanic," Preston repeated, letting the word hang in the air like an insult. "And tell me about your shop, Carter's Auto Repair. Is it true that your business has been cited 3 times for code violations in the last 2 years?" "Objection." Sarah Jenkins stood up. "Relevance?" "Goes to credibility, Your Honor." Preston shot back smoothly. "If the witness cannot maintain a simple shop, how can we trust his observation of a complex accident scene?" Judge Harrison, who had golfed with Preston's father for 20 years, waved a hand. "Overruled. Answer the question." Ezekiel shifted. "We had some wiring issues. Old building. We fixed them." "Right. Wiring issues." Preston sneered. He turned his back on Ezekiel, facing the gallery. "Mr. Carter, let's talk about your vision. When was your last eye exam?" Ezekiel blinked. I don't recall exactly. "A few years." "A few years? So we are relying on the eyesight of a man who hasn't seen a doctor in years, who works in a dimly lit garage, and who admits it was raining. And yet you are certain, that you saw Mr. Montgomery." "I saw him," Ezekiel insisted, though his voice wavered slightly under the pressure. Preston spun around, slamming his hand on the railing. "Or did you just see a young, wealthy white man in the news and decide to make yourself a hero? Did you think maybe there's a reward involved? A GoFundMe page, perhaps?" "No, sir," Ezekiel said, his voice hardening just a fraction. "I just saw what I saw." "We'll see about that," Preston whispered. Preston walked back to his table and picked up a piece of paper. This was the kill shot. He had dug into Ezekiel's past. He knew about the time Ezekiel was arrested at 19. He knew about the debt. He was about to paint Ezekiel not just as mistaken, but as a malicious liar targeting a rich kid for a payout. But Preston was so focused on the narrative he was building, he missed the one detail that mattered. He missed the way Ezekiel's eyes weren't fearful anymore. They were calculating. "Mr. Carter," Preston continued, pacing the floor, "let's discuss your background. Is it true that 20 years ago you were arrested for fraud?" The courtroom gasped. The jury members leaned forward. Julian Montgomery smirked openly now. Ezekiel looked straight at Preston. "I was 19. I was charged with passing a bad check. The charges were dropped because it was a mistake by the bank." "A mistake by the bank," Preston mocked. "Always someone else's fault, isn't it? The bank's fault. The rain's fault. The wiring's fault. It seems you have a history of not taking responsibility, Mr. Carter. And now, you want to take responsibility for ruining a young man's life." "I am under oath," Ezekiel said calmly. "And what is an oath to a man with your history?" Preston sneered. He was enjoying this. He was performing. "Let's talk about the car. You said it had a broken headlight. My client's car was inspected the next morning by the police. No broken headlight. How do you explain that?" Ezekiel paused. "He fixed it." Preston laughed loudly. "He fixed it, overnight, without a trace?" Mr. Montgomery is a college student, not a magician, and certainly not a mechanic like you, unless you're suggesting he went to a chop shop. I'm saying, Ezekiel said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming clearer, shedding the simple dialect Preston had assumed was natural, that the headlight assembly on a 2024 Obsidian Black Range Rover requires a T20 Torx driver and about 15 minutes to swap if you have a spare. It's a modular unit. Preston stopped laughing. He blinked. That was specific. An interesting theory. Preston recovered quickly, waving it off. But let's stick to facts, not your mechanic fantasies. You claimed you saw custom rims. Can you describe them? They were forged monoblock wheels. Looked like Vossen HF5s. Matte black finish. 22-inch. Ezekiel recited the details without hesitation. Preston frowned. This level of detail was annoying. It made the witness sound competent. He needed to pivot back to humiliation. He needed to make this about race and class without saying the words explicitly. He needed to make the jury see us versus them. You know a lot about expensive parts for a man who can barely pay his rent, Preston said coldly. Tell me, Zeke. Can I call you Zeke? It fits you better. My name is Mr. Carter, Ezekiel said firmly. Sure, Mr. Carter. Tell me, do you harbor any resentment toward people like Julian? People who drive cars that cost more than your entire life's earnings? People who were born into a world you can only look at through a dirty garage window? Sarah Jenkins jumped up. Objection, argumentative, bedoring the witness. I am establishing motive for bias, Your Honor, Preston shouted. I'll allow it, Judge Harrison said, looking bored. Preston leaned in close to Ezekiel, his face inches away. Admit it. You didn't see a face. You saw a suit. You saw a shiny car. And you saw a chance to stick it to a rich white boy. You're not here for justice, Zeke. You're here because you're jealous. You're here because you're a failure, and my client is a success. The silence in the room was deafening. It was cruel. It was ugly. Ezekiel sat very still. He took a deep breath. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked sad. Are you finished? Ezekiel asked quietly. I'm finished with you, Preston spat, turning around to walk back to his seat, confident he had destroyed the witness's credibility. No further questions. I have a question, Ezekiel said. Preston stopped. He turned back, amused. Excuse me? You don't ask questions here, Mr. Carter. You answer them. I have something to add to my answer regarding the headlight, Ezekiel said, looking up at the judge. And the rims. And the driver. Judge Harrison looked at Preston, then at Ezekiel. Witness may clarify his answer. Ezekiel reached into the back pocket of his jeans. Objection, Preston shouted. He's reaching for something. It's a USB drive, Ezekiel said, holding up a small silver flash drive. We are not in discovery phase, Preston yelled, panic suddenly flaring in his chest. You cannot introduce surprise evidence. It's not surprise evidence, Ezekiel said, his voice ringing clear and authoritative, the simple mechanic persona vanishing completely. It's rebuttal evidence to your claim that I am a liar. You asked how I knew about the rims. You asked how I was sure. I'm sure because I didn't just see the car, Mr. Sterling. Ezekiel looked directly into the camera of the court feed. I fixed the car. The courtroom erupted. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. Order! Order in this court! Preston froze. What? 3 hours after the accident, Ezekiel said, his voice cutting through the noise. A man came to my shop. He offered me $5,000 cash to replace a broken headlight and swap out 4 custom Vossen rims for stock ones immediately. He said he hit a deer. He was crying. He was scared. He said his lawyer told him to scrub the car before the cops saw it. Preston's face went pale. "That man," Ezekiel pointed at Julian, "was your client, and the lawyer he was on the phone with, the one giving him the instructions on how to hide the evidence." Ezekiel turned his gaze slowly, locking eyes with Preston Sterling. "He put you on speakerphone, Mr. Sterling, and my shop, it has security cameras with audio." The silence that followed Ezekiel's declaration was shattered by Preston Sterling. "Objection! This is preposterous!" Preston shrieked, his voice cracking, losing its smooth, whiskey-aged veneer. He slammed his hand on the defense table, scattering papers. "This witness is producing unverified, authenticated digital media in the middle of a cross-examination. This is a trial by ambush. That drive could contain anything: viruses, malware, deepfakes." Sarah Jenkins, the prosecutor, was already on her feet, her eyes wide. She hadn't known, but she saw the look on Julian Montgomery's face. The young heir had gone ghost white. He was gripping the table so hard his knuckles were translucent. "It's real," she realized. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice trembling with suppressed excitement, "if the witness possesses evidence of a felony, specifically tampering with evidence regarding the very vehicle in question, it is not only admissible, it is mandatory that the court hears it. This goes to the heart of the case." "It goes to the heart of a mistrial," Preston roared. He turned to the judge, his eyes pleading. "Judge Harrison, you cannot allow this charade. This man is a mechanic with a grudge. He's probably cooked up some AI-generated audio to sell to the tabloids. If you let this play, you are turning your courtroom into a circus." Judge Harrison looked down from the bench. He was in a tight spot. He liked Preston. They shared a country club membership. But there were 3 cameras in the back of the room, one of them live streaming to a local news channel. The chat rooms were likely already on fire. If he suppressed evidence of a crime, he'd be the next one under investigation. "Mr. Sterling, sit down," Judge Harrison said, his voice icy. "But sit down." Preston collapsed into his chair. He looked at Julian. "Tell me you didn't go to that shop," he hissed. Julian didn't answer. He just stared at the USB drive in Ezekiel's hand like it was a grenade with the pin pulled. "Mr. Carter," the judge said, addressing Ezekiel, "you claim this drive contains security footage and audio from the night of the accident." "Yes, Your Honor," Ezekiel said calmly. "My system uploads to a cloud server instantly. I downloaded the raw files this morning when I realized who the defendant was. I haven't edited them. I haven't touched them." "Bailiff," the judge ordered. "Take the drive, pass it to the clerk. We will view this in camera," meaning without the jury present first, to determine authenticity. "No," Ezekiel interrupted. The room gasped again. "You didn't say no to a judge." "Excuse me?" Judge Harrison scowled. "With all due respect, Your Honor," Ezekiel said, standing tall. "Mr. Sterling just accused me of manufacturing evidence to the jury. He attacked my character and my professional integrity publicly. If you view this in private, the doubt he planted remains. He opened the door to my credibility. The only way to close it is to play it now. Unless Mr. Sterling is afraid of his own voice." Preston's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. Sarah Jenkins seized the moment. "The witness is right, Your Honor. The defense opened the door by accusing the witness of lying about the car's condition. This is direct rebuttal evidence." Judge Harrison rubbed his temples. He looked at Preston, who was sweating profusely. He looked at the jury, who were looking at Preston with suspicion. "Aloud," the judge said. "Play it." The clerk took the drive. The courtroom was dead silent. The only sound was the clicking of a mouse as the clerk navigated the files. A projector screen descended from the ceiling. Preston loosened his tie. He felt like he was suffocating. "It can't be that clear," he told himself. It was a garage. Echoes. Noise. It'll be garbled. I can argue it's unintelligible. The screen flickered to life. The video was crisp. 4K resolution. High dynamic range. It showed the interior of Carter's auto repair. It was spotless. Not the dirty dungeon Preston had described. The tools were organized on magnetic strips. The floor was polished concrete. In the center of the frame stood a black Range Rover, and standing next to it, pacing frantically, was Julian Montgomery. Then the audio kicked in. It wasn't garbled. It was crystal clear, captured by high-fidelity directional microphones. "I don't know what to do," Julian's voice rang out through the court speakers, shrill and panicked. "I hit something. A dog, maybe a person, I don't know. There was blood on the fender." On screen, Ezekiel walked into the frame. He looked calm. "You need to call the police, son. If you hit a person, you can't be here." "No!" Julian screamed. He held up his phone. "Preston said no police. He said get the car fixed first." In the courtroom, every head turned toward the defense table. Preston Sterling stared straight ahead, his eyes dead. On the screen, Julian put the phone on speaker. "Preston? I'm at a shop, someplace on 5th. The guy says he can swap the rims." And then, the voice of doom filled the courtroom. Smooth, arrogant, unmistakable. "Julian, listen to me carefully," the voice of Preston Sterling said. "Do not tell him your name. Pay him double. Get those Vossen rims off. Throw them in a dumpster across town. And the headlight, if he can't fix it, tell him to smash the other one so it looks like a fender bender. We need to erase the timeline. Do you understand? Scrub it. I'll handle the cops in the morning." "But the guy is asking questions," Julian whined on the recording. "Give him $5,000, Preston's voice commanded. "Grease monkeys don't care about justice, Julian. They care about cash. Buy his silence and get out of there." The recording ended. The screen went black. For 10 seconds, nobody moved. The silence wasn't just quiet. It was heavy. It pressed down on everyone's chest. Sarah Jenkins stood up slowly. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to be dramatic. The drama was already suffocating. "Your Honor," she said softly, "the people move to revoke Mr. Montgomery's bail immediately. And we would like to request a recess to speak with the district attorney regarding charges of witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy against Mr. Sterling." Preston Sterling didn't stand up. He couldn't. His legs felt like jelly. His career, his reputation, his life. It had all incinerated in 3 minutes of high-definition audio. But the animal instinct in him, the cornered rat, snapped. He stood up, trembling. "It's fake!" Preston shouted, though his voice lacked any power. "It's a deep fake. Voice cloning technology. Anyone can do it. This man, this mechanic, he couldn't possibly have a recording system of that fidelity. Did you see the resolution? The audio balance? That's studio quality." He pointed a shaking finger at Ezekiel. "Who are you working for?" Preston demanded, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Who put you up to this? The opposition? My political rivals? You're just a grunt. You couldn't afford a system like that. This is a setup." Judge Harrison looked disgusted. "Mr. Sterling, sit down or I will have you held in contempt. I demand a technical inquiry," Preston yelled, spit flying from his lips. "I demand to know this man's credentials. A simple mechanic in the South Side doesn't have military-grade surveillance in his shop. He's a fraud. He's a plant." Ezekiel, who had been watching Preston's meltdown with a stoic expression, leaned into the microphone. "Are you asking for my credentials, Mr. Sterling?" Ezekiel asked. "I'm asking who you really are," Preston spat, "because you aren't just a mechanic." "You're right," Ezekiel said. "I'm not just a mechanic." Ezekiel turned to the judge. Your Honor, may I answer the counsel's question regarding my background and the technical specifications of my recording equipment? It seems relevant to the authenticity of the evidence. Judge Harrison nodded slowly. Proceed. Ezekiel adjusted his flannel shirt. He looked at the jury. My name is Ezekiel Carter, he began. Mr. Sterling was correct that I haven't had an eye exam in a few years. I haven't needed one since I retired from the United States Air Force. Preston froze. I served 20 years, Ezekiel continued, his voice steady and commanding. My specialty was signal intelligence and audio forensics. I spent 2 decades analyzing intercepted transmissions, separating noise from speech in war zones. I hold a master's degree in acoustical engineering from Georgia Tech. The jury's jaws dropped. Sarah Jenkins smiled behind her hand. As for the shop, Ezekiel went on, turning his gaze back to the pale lawyer, I own it. I also own the building, and the 2 buildings next to it, and a chain of 12 other repair centers across the state. I work at the 5th and Vine location because it was my father's shop. I work on cars because it helps me think. It's peaceful. Or, it was. Ezekiel gestured to the screen where the video had played. The camera system is a custom setup I designed myself using redundant server backups and encrypted watermarking. It records in uncompressed FLAC audio to ensure that if I ever catch a noise in an engine, I can isolate the frequency. Or in this case, if I catch a lawyer soliciting a felony. Ezekiel leaned forward over the witness railing, looking down at Preston like a teacher scolding a toddler. So, to answer your question, Mr. Sterling, it's not a deep fake. I analyzed the spectral footprint of your voice myself before I brought it here. It's a perfect match to the voice I'm hearing right now. The only difference is, on the tape, you sounded confident. Right now, you sound like a man who knows he's going to prison. The gallery erupted. This time, the judge didn't bang the gavel. He just let the wave of noise wash over the defense table. Preston stammered. Mr. Carter, Judge Harrison said, cutting through the noise. Thank you for your service, and for your testimony. The prosecution has no further questions, Sarah Jenkins beamed. Mr. Sterling, the judge asked. Cross-examination? Preston looked at his notes. They were useless. He looked at Julian. Julian was crying, his head in his hands. He looked at the exit sign. No. No questions, Preston whispered. Step down, the judge ordered. As Ezekiel walked past the defense table, he didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He just walked with the heavy, rhythmic thud of his work boots. But as he passed Preston, he stopped for just a second. You should have checked the wiring, Ezekiel whispered. We fixed it. The aftermath of Ezekiel's testimony was not a slow burn. It was an explosion. Judge Harrison ordered a recess, but he also ordered bailiffs to stand near the exits. He wasn't taking any chances. Inside the holding cell adjacent to the courtroom, the dynamic between lawyer and client had shifted violently. The small concrete room smelled of stale coffee and fear. Julian Montgomery was pacing, his expensive grey suit now rumpled and damp with sweat. Preston sat on the metal bench, staring at the floor, his mind racing through legal loopholes that were rapidly closing. You said it was handled, Julian screamed, kicking the metal toilet. You said he was a nobody. You said he was a grease monkey who couldn't tie his own shoes. Shut up, Julian, Preston snapped, massaging his temples. I'm thinking. Thinking. You're done. We're done. Julian pulled out his phone. My dad is calling. He's been calling for 10 minutes. What do I tell him? That his lawyer is on tape telling me to commit a felony? Don't answer that, Preston warned. We need to get ahead of this. We need to claim duress. We need to say the tape was taken out of context. Out of context? Julian laughed, a hysterical, high-pitched sound. You told me to smash my headlight. You called him a grease monkey. It's over. Suddenly, the heavy door to the holding cell buzzed and clanked open. Standing there was not a bailiff, but a man in a bespoke navy suit that cost more than most people's cars. He had silver hair, cold blue eyes, and an aura of absolute authority. Roger Montgomery, Julian's father, the CEO of Montgomery Real Estate. Behind him stood two other men, lawyers from a different firm, the cleaners. "Dad!" Julian rushed forward. "Dad, listen, Preston told me." Roger held up a hand. Julian stopped dead. Roger didn't even look at his son. His eyes were fixed on Preston Sterling. "Hello, Roger," Preston said, standing up, trying to summon some of his old bravado. "We have a situation, but I have a strategy. The witness is—" "The witness," Roger said, his voice calm and terrifyingly quiet, "is a decorated war veteran and a successful business owner whom you just slandered on live television. And you are a liability." "I was protecting your son," Preston argued. "I did what had to be done." "You got caught," Roger said, "and you got caught being stupid. The Montgomery family does not tolerate stupidity, and we certainly do not tolerate our lawyers instructing our heirs to commit crimes on record." "I can fix this," Preston pleaded. "I can file a motion for mistrial based on—" "You're fired, Preston," Roger said flatly. Preston blinked. "You can't fire me in the middle of a trial." "I just did." "These gentlemen," Roger gestured to the lawyers behind him, "are taking over Julian's defense. They're going to advise him to plead guilty." "Guilty?" Julian gasped. "Dad, no. I can't go to jail." Roger finally looked at his son. The look was devoid of sympathy. "You hit a woman, Julian. You ran. And you listened to this idiot. You are going to plead guilty. You are going to apologize to the family. And you are going to serve your time. That is the only way to save the stock price. The company survives. You'll learn." Julian sank onto the bench, sobbing. Roger turned back to Preston. "As for you, I just got off the phone with the Bar Association and the district attorney. I told them that I was shocked to learn that our family attorney had gone rogue. I told them we had no knowledge of your illegal tactics. We are cooperating fully with the investigation into your conduct." Preston felt the blood drain from his face. "You're feeding me to the wolves." "You are the wolf, Preston," Roger said coldly. "Or you thought you were. Turns out, you were just a dog barking at the wrong car. You tried to bite Ezekiel Carter, and you broke your teeth. Now, you're going to be put down." Roger stepped back. "Gentlemen, he's all yours." The two new lawyers stepped in. One handed Preston a document. "This is a formal notice of termination of representation," the lawyer said, "and a civil suit for legal malpractice. We're suing you for the damages to the Montgomery brand. $30 million. Preston stared at the paper. His hand shook so hard he dropped it. "And one more thing," Roger added from the doorway. "That grease monkey, Ezekiel Carter. I looked him up. He holds the patent for the noise cancellation tech used in our company jets. We pay him royalties every year. You insulted a man who makes more passive income than you earn in billable hours." Roger slammed the door. Preston was left alone in the silence of the cell, the echo of his own arrogance ringing in his ears. But the nightmare wasn't over. The door opened again, and this time it was the bailiff. "Mr. Sterling," the bailiff said, unhooking handcuffs from his belt. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "For what?" Preston gasped. "Judge Harrison issued a bench warrant, witness tampering, suborning perjury, and destruction of evidence. You have the right to remain silent. though I suggest you use it this time. The last time you spoke, it didn't go so well." As the cold steel clicked around Preston's wrists, the reality set in. He wasn't going home to his penthouse. He was going to the county lockup. He was going to be processed by the very system he had mocked for 20 years. And the man who put him there was probably back at his shop, wiping grease off his hands, listening to the hum of an engine, and enjoying the quiet. The transition from Preston Sterling, Escan, to Defendant Sterling was not graceful. It was violent and absolute. After the bailiff clicked the cuffs on him, Preston was marched not out the back door, but through the main hallway of the courthouse. This was a deviation from protocol, usually reserved for the most despised criminals. The press had been tipped off, likely by Roger Montgomery's PR team. As Preston emerged, shielding his face with his cuffed hands, the flashbulbs blinded him. The questions were like jagged glass. "Preston, did you bribe the judge in the 2021 Henderson case? Is it true you're being disbarred? Mr. Sterling, do you have a comment on the audio tape?" He was shoved into the back of a police cruiser. The plastic seat was hard, smelling of vomit and disinfectant. He sat there, unable to adjust his suit jacket, which was bunching up uncomfortably, and watched the city pass by through the wire mesh. He had driven these streets in his Porsche 1,000 times, feeling like a king. Now, he was just cargo. The arraignment the next morning was the first humiliation. Preston stood in the same courtroom where he had practiced for 15 years. But he was in an orange jumpsuit, his custom suit, his tie, his Rolex, all bagged in a locker downstairs. "The people request bail be denied," the district attorney announced. It wasn't Sarah Jenkins. The DA himself had stepped in. He wanted the glory of taking down the corrupt giant. "Mr. Sterling has significant offshore assets in the Cayman Islands and dual citizenship with St. Kitts. He is a massive flight risk." "Your Honor," Preston spoke up, his voice hoarse, "I can explain the assets. They are held in trust." "You have counsel, Mr. Sterling," the judge cut him off. It wasn't Judge Harrison. He had recused himself. It was Judge Vance, a woman Preston had once called emotional in a sidebar 3 years ago. She looked at him with zero sympathy. Preston looked at his lawyer, a public defender named Toby Clark. Toby was 25, looked terrified, and was wearing a suit that was 2 sizes too big. Preston had likely mocked Toby in the hallway a month ago. Now Toby was the only thing standing between Preston and a cage. We submit to the court's wisdom," Toby stammered. Preston stared at him. "You submit? Fight for me," he hissed. "Mr. Sterling, silence," Judge Vance ordered. "Bail is denied. The defendant is remanded to custody until trial." The gavel banged. It sounded like a coffin lid slamming shut. The months leading up to the trial were a slow-motion car crash. The hard karma the universe had promised began to arrive in waves. First, the Bar Association didn't just disbar him. They made a public spectacle of striking his name from the rolls. They launched an audit into every case he had won in the last 10 years. Then came the civil suits. Roger Montgomery's lawsuit for malpractice was just the start. Former clients, realizing their lawyer was a fraud, sued for refunds. The families of victims he had crushed in court sued for emotional distress. Preston watched on the communal TV in the jail's day room as the news showed his penthouse being raided by the feds. He saw movers carrying out his Italian leather sofas. He saw his art collection, the modern pieces he used to brag about, being loaded into vans. "Hey, Sterling," a massive inmate named Marcus grunted, pointing at the TV. "Ain't that your car?" Preston looked. His obsidian black Porsche 911 was being towed away. "Yeah," Preston whispered. "Nice ride," Marcus laughed. "Bummer you ain't never gonna drive it again." When the trial finally began, State v. Sterling was the hottest ticket in the city. The courtroom was packed. Law students skipped class to watch. Preston, against all advice, decided to fire his public defender and represent himself. His ego wouldn't let him do otherwise. He believed he could still charm a jury. He believed he was smarter than everyone else. He was wrong. The prosecution didn't just play the tape of him and Julian. They played the tapes from Ezekiel's other cameras, the ones outside the shop. The jury watched footage of Preston parking his car a block away from the shop before the meeting, checking his hair in the mirror and rehearsing his lines. They saw the premeditation. But the nail in the coffin was the financial trail. Ezekiel Carter, the simple mechanic, had done more than just record audio. When Preston had transferred the hush money to Ezekiel's account, which Ezekiel had immediately turned over to the FBI, Preston had used a shell company. Ezekiel took the stand again. This time he wasn't wearing a flannel shirt. He was wearing a sharp navy blazer. He looked every bit the intelligence officer he was. "Mr. Carter," the DA asked, "can you explain this bank transfer?" "It's a digital routing number," Ezekiel explained, turning to the jury and using a laser pointer on the projection screen. Mr. Sterling thought he was hiding the source of the funds by bouncing it through 3 servers, but he made a mistake. He used the same IP address to authorize the transfer that he uses for his office Wi-Fi. I traced the packet data back to his desk. Preston stood up at the defense table. "Objection! Hearsay! You are not a forensic accountant." "No," Ezekiel said coolly. "But I wrote the encryption software the bank uses to secure those transfers. I know the back door because I built the house." The jury laughed, not with Preston, but at him. In his closing argument, Preston tried to cry. He tried to talk about his difficult childhood, which was a lie. He grew up in a gated community. He tried to talk about the pressure of the job. The jury was out for less than an hour. Guilty. 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 18 counts. Witness tampering, obstruction of justice, bribery, money laundering, and conspiracy. Judge Vance looked at Preston over her spectacles. "Mr. Sterling, you spent your career manipulating the law for personal gain. You treated the justice system like a game. You treated people like pawns. You mocked the very citizens you swore an oath to serve. It is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 25 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole for at least 20. Preston's knees gave out. He grabbed the table to stop from falling. 20 years. He would be 65 when he got out. His life was over. As the bailiffs dragged him away, he looked back at the gallery. He saw Ezekiel Carter sitting in the back row. Ezekiel didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just nodded, once, a solemn acknowledgement that the balance had been restored. 2 years later, Federal Correctional Institution, Otisville. The transition from the penthouse to the cell block hadn't just broken Preston Sterling, it had erased him. In the outside world, time moved fast. New scandals replaced old ones. But inside Otisville, time was a thick, suffocating sludge. Every second was an hour, every hour a day. Preston, now simply inmate 8940, sat on a plastic stool in the prison laundry room. The air smelled of industrial bleach and damp rot, a far cry from the sandalwood and aged leather of his corner office. His job was to fold grey, scratchy inmate uniforms. He had to fold 300 a day to earn 12 cents an hour. His hands, which used to be insured for $1 million and manicured weekly, were now raw, chapped, and covered in small cuts. His fingernails were cracked. The gold signet ring was long gone, replaced by dirt that wouldn't scrub off. "Hey, counselor," Preston flinched. He hated that word now. It wasn't a title anymore. It was a punchline. A massive inmate named Alvarez shadowed over him. Preston remembered Alvarez well. 5 years ago, Preston had prosecuted him for racketeering. He had called Alvarez a cancer on society during his closing arguments. Now, they shared a toilet. "I got a letter from my parole board," Alvarez grunted, tossing a crumpled envelope onto Preston's folding table. "Read it. Tell me if they're screwing me." "I can't practice law, Alvarez," Preston whispered, not looking up. "I'm disbarred. It's illegal for me to give legal advice." "I ain't asking for advice," Alvarez sneered, leaning in close. "I'm asking you to read. Unless you think you're too good for it. You think you're better than us, Mr. Silk Tie?" "No," Preston said quickly, his voice trembling. "No, I'll read it." He picked up the letter with shaking hands. This was his life now. The shark of the Superior Court was now a clerk for the criminals he used to put away. He was surviving on scraps of protection, trading his remaining dignity for safety. Later that afternoon, during his 30 minutes of library time, Preston sought refuge in the corner. The library was the only quiet place in the facility. He picked up a copy of Time magazine. It was 4 months old, dog-eared and stained with coffee, but it was a window to the world he had lost. He flipped the pages listlessly, looking for familiar faces. Maybe a colleague who made partner. Maybe a politician he had bribed. He froze on page 45. The headline screamed at him in bold black letters, "Blue-collar billionaire, how one mechanic fixed a broken system." There was a full-page photo. It was vibrant, sharp, and humiliating. It showed a massive, futuristic campus made of glass and steel. Solar panels glinted on the roof. A sign out front, carved into expensive marble, read, "The Carter Institute for At-Risk Youth." Standing in the foreground, cutting a red ribbon with a pair of golden scissors, was Ezekiel Carter. He looked magnificent. He wasn't wearing a mechanic's jumpsuit. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that fit his broad frame perfectly. He looked healthy, strong, and at peace. Next to him stood the mayor and the governor. Preston's breath hitched. He forced himself to read the article, each word landing like a physical blow. Former Air Force intelligence officer and entrepreneur Ezekiel Carter has turned a courtroom scandal into a community triumph. Following the high-profile seizure of assets from the disgraced law firm Sterling and Associates, Carter was awarded a substantial settlement for defamation and damages. But instead of buying a yacht, Carter bought a city block. "I wanted to teach kids that working with your hands is honorable," Carter told reporters. "I wanted to create a place where intelligence isn't measured by how well you can lie, but by how well you can build." Preston's eyes scanned down the page, his heart hammering against his ribs. The institute is entirely tuition-free, funded by an endowment created from the liquidated estates of Preston Sterling. In a twist of poetic justice that has captivated the nation, the primary scholarship fund is legally named the Sterling Grant. Preston dropped the magazine. He felt like he was going to vomit. The Sterling Grant. Ezekiel hadn't just beaten him. He had branded him. Every year, hundreds of underprivileged kids, the very uneducated people Preston had mocked, the grease monkeys he despised, would go to college on his money. His name would no longer be associated with exclusive country clubs or high-stakes acquittals. It would be associated with trade schools, welding certifications, and auto repair. Ezekiel had taken Preston's legacy of elitism and turned it into a charity for the working class. It was the ultimate, permanent insult. "Time's up, Sterling," the guard shouted, banging a baton on the table. Preston stumbled back to his cell block. As he walked past the common area, the television was blaring the evening news. And in political news, the anchor chirped. State Representative Julian Montgomery announced his engagement today. Preston stopped dead. He stared at the screen. There was Julian, the kid who had hit the woman, the kid who had called Preston in a panic. Julian was smiling, his teeth whitened, his arm around a debutante. He looked older, wiser, and completely untouched. Montgomery, who famously cooperated with authorities to expose the corruption of his former attorney, Preston Sterling, is currently leading in the polls for the state senate, the reporter said. His campaign slogan, "Second Chances," resonates with voters. Preston felt a laugh bubbling up in his throat, a jagged, hysterical sound. They had survived. The Montgomerys had spun the narrative. They had painted Preston as the villain who manipulated a confused young man. Julian was the victim. Preston was the monster. The rich stayed rich. The powerful stayed powerful. And the hired help took the fall. Preston walked into his cell. The heavy steel door slid shut with a clank that echoed in his bones, the sound of finality. He sat on his cot. The cell was 6 feet by 8 feet, smaller than the walk-in closet where he used to keep his shoes. He looked at the wall. He had scratched a calendar into the paint with a plastic spoon. 18 years left. He closed his eyes and tried to summon a memory of his old life. He tried to remember the taste of the 20-year-old scotch he used to drink. He tried to feel the silk sheets of his penthouse bed. But he couldn't. All he could hear was the hum of the prison ventilation system. It rattled. It wheezed. It sounded like an engine that was misfiring. "You should have checked the wiring," Ezekiel had whispered. Preston lay back on the thin, lumpy mattress and stared at the water stains on the ceiling. He finally understood. The wiring wasn't in the car. The wiring was the moral fabric of the universe. He had spent 45 years thinking he could cut the cords, bypass the fuses, and hotwire reality to suit his needs. But the circuit had finally closed. The fuse had blown, and Preston Sterling was left in the dark. Meanwhile, 10 miles away, the sun was setting over the Carter Institute. The glass walls reflected the orange and purple sky, looking like a jewel in the middle of the city. Inside the main workshop, the sounds of industry were winding down. Students were wiping down tools, storing welding masks, and laughing as they packed up their bags. Ezekiel Carter walked through the hallway. The click of his dress shoes on the polished concrete was rhythmic and strong. He stopped at a display case near the entrance. Inside the case was a plaque explaining the history of the building, and right below it, small and unobtrusive, sat a silver USB drive. A young student, a teenager named Leo, who had grown up in the foster system, stopped next to him. "Mr. Carter," Leo asked, "why do we call it the Sterling Grant? I looked that guy up. He was a bad dude. He tried to ruin you." Ezekiel looked down at the boy and smiled. It wasn't a smile of vengeance. It was a smile of absolute victory. "We keep his name on it for a reason, Leo," Ezekiel said, his voice deep and calm. "It's a reminder." A reminder of what? That no matter how much money you have, or how expensive your suit is, if you build your life on a lie, eventually it breaks down. Ezekiel placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "And when it does, the people who know how to fix things will be the ones left standing." Ezekiel turned off the lights in the hallway. "Come on, Leo," Ezekiel said. "I'll give you a ride home. I just finished restoring an old vintage Porsche. I want you to listen to the engine. It purrs like a kitten." "A Porsche?" Leo's eyes went wide. "Where did you get a Porsche?" Ezekiel chuckled as they walked out the door into the cool evening air. "Oh, I picked it up at a police auction," Ezekiel said, opening the door to the obsidian black 911 that once belonged to a man who thought he was untouchable. "Got it for pennies on the dollar." As they drove away, the engine roared, a sound of power, precision, and justice. Back in his cell, Preston Sterling rolled over and faced the wall, covering his ears to block out the noise. But the silence was even louder. And that is the story of how Preston Sterling, a man who thought he was above the law, ended up paying for the future of the very people he mocked. It's a brutal reminder that intelligence isn't about your vocabulary or your zip code. It's about character. Ezekiel Carter proved that true power comes from integrity, while Preston learned that karma is the only judge you can't bribe. The Montgomerys might have slipped away, but Preston lost everything: his freedom, his fortune, and even his legacy. Do you think the punishment fit the crime? Should Julian have gone to prison too, or was Preston the real villain? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.